A family stands in a mud brick room in Goshen. Belts fastened. Sandals already bound to their feet. They are holding wooden staffs. You did not buy yeast in a sterile packet to make a loaf of bread rise. You took a piece of yesterday's dough. The scale of the dough, 3 measures, is the exact amount Sarah prepared for 3 angels under the oaks of Mamre. It is the measurement of a divine banquet. Jesus is telling them that grace is just as infectious as sin. He is promising that the holy Zume will boil up and consume the earth, not with the bitterness of Pharaoh, but with the life of God. But the paradox of the yeast does not end in the Gospels, because 20 years after Jesus tells this story, a man writing a letter to a church full of chaos is going to pull the Passover bread and the kingdom yeast together into one devastating command. When the Apostle Paul writes to the chaotic church in Corinth, he diagnoses their moral collapse with a single, brutal metaphor. 1 Corinthians chapter 5. The city is a sensory overload. The markets smell of roasted sacrifice. The harbor air tastes of salt and copper. The streets are loud. The church is young. The church is gifted. The church is completely compromised. A man is sleeping with his stepmother. The scandal is public. But Paul is not just shocked by the action. He is stunned by the reaction. The congregation is not mourning. They are boasting. They are arrogant. They are celebrating their own open-mindedness. Paul points at the mixing bowl. Your boasting is not good. A lump you had intentionally set aside to sour. Collect wild yeast and ferment in the warm air, and you kneaded it into today's fresh flour. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? The compromise is not a private struggle. It is a community contagion. It is Zume, Qualo. It is boiling up. It is puffing up the entire congregation with a false sense of spiritual superiority. The core is rotting. The edges are swelling. The dough is going sour. Paul issues a quarantine protocol. He reaches back to the midnight escape from Egypt. Cleanse out the old leaven that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. The grammar here is a paradox. It demands attention. He tells them to sweep the house so they can become unleavened, but he ends the sentence by declaring they already are unleavened. They are already clean. The blood is already on the wood. The lamb is already consumed. The exodus is finished. So why do they have to sweep? Because the past is stubborn. Because the culture of Corinth lingers in the muscle memory. Because the arrogance of the world is always looking for a warm, dark place to ferment inside the church. The command is not a legalistic burden. It is a call to reality. Paul tells them to keep the feast. He tells them to eat the flat bread of sincerity and truth. He tells them to reject the leaven of malice and evil. The old dough would infect the new batch. The fermented spores would spread, multiply, and puff up the entire bowl. It was an unbroken chain of transmission. Malice is not just a bad attitude. It is an active fungus. It spreads. It multiplies. It infects the new flour. The church must strip itself down to bare uninflated truth. They must become the flatbread of affliction once again. They must remember exactly who they are without the grace of the cross. But how do you actually locate the hidden spores? And the part that makes this remarkable is the ancient tradition of exactly how a Jewish family hunts in the dark. Picture a house in 1st century Jerusalem. The night before the Passover, a father walks through the darkened rooms, holding a single, small clay lamp. In his other hand, he carries a wooden spoon and a goose feather. He sweeps the feather gently along the cracks of the stone floor, pulling dust from the corners in the flickering light. This ancient ritual is called Bedekat Kametz, the search for the leaven. By the time the father takes the flame into the shadows, the house has already been scoured for weeks. The sweeping with the feather is the final, definitive act to ensure absolutely nothing fermented remains hidden in the dark. The rabbinic tradition dictates that this search must be conducted entirely by candlelight, never during the day. You do not hunt for the old dough. Yesterday, shaping today. The past, expanding into the present. When God tells a nation of slaves to sweep their houses clean, in the broad, ambient glare of the noon sun. Where the angle of the light can leave deep crevices in the shadow, you hunt for it with a localized, intentional flame, bringing the fire directly to the baseboards, close to the places where crumbs naturally fall and are easily forgotten. The leaven is not a massive boulder you can simply step around. It is a microscopic spore you must actively hunt. It hides in the fractures of the stone. It settles in the unseen corners of a household. Over the centuries, the Jewish sages recognized that this physical search was pointing to a much more terrifying internal reality. In the Talmudic writings, the shemetz became the ultimate metaphor for the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. It represents the pride that puffs up the human ego, the bitterness that sours relationships, the quiet arrogance that ferments in the dark when no one is watching. The rabbis understood something fundamental about human biology and human nature. We can scrub the outward floors of our lives. We can present a clean house to the public street. But there is always a crumb left in the dark. There is always a trace of the old Egypt, lingering in the muscle memory of the soul. He is commanding a hard stop to that transmission. Exodus, chapter 12. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. The search with the candle is not a proud display of purity. It is a humble confession of contamination. When Paul tells the Corinthian church to sweep out the old leaven, he is invoking this exact midnight search. He is asking them to take a lamp into the dark corners of their community, to find the malice and the wickedness that they have grown comfortable ignoring, and to sweep it onto the wooden spoon, so it can be thrown into the fire the next morning. The candle exposes what the daylight ignores. But what happens when you take that ancient, flickering flame out of the stone house and turn it directly toward your own chest? If you are in a season where you feel a quiet, heavy bitterness expanding in your chest, you need to look at what you are kneading into your daily flour. We all have a lump of Egypt hidden somewhere in the house. We all have a piece of zume, a small, seemingly harmless grievance, a tiny fraction of self-righteousness, a quiet resentment towards someone who wounded us, stashed in the dark corners of our daily routine. On the first day you shall remove leaven out of your houses. For 400 years, they have eaten the bread of Egypt. We think we can contain it. We assume that because we only let it out in small doses, because we only feed it in the absolute privacy of our own thoughts, it will remain manageable and small. But the yeast does not stay small. It is a biological impossibility. Once that tiny spore of malice hits the warmth of human emotion, it begins to feed on the natural sugars of your mind. It ferments in the dark. It forces the ego to swell, puffing you up with the illusion of moral superiority and the false, intoxicating comfort of always being right. You wake up one morning and realize the bitterness has completely overtaken your unthinking responses, your closest relationships, and the very way you view the grace of God. The shemetz is not a static memory of the pain that happened to you. It is an active infection shaping the person you are becoming. This is why the ancient search with the small clay lamp is so vital for the modern heart. If you wait for the harsh daylight of a public crisis to expose your arrogance, the dough has already gone irreversibly sour. Jesus is asking you to take a flickering, localized flame into the quiet, unexamined fractures of your own soul before the sun comes up. For 400 years, the culture of Pharaoh, the economy of the whip, and the worship of the Nile have been worked into their daily dough. He is asking you to hunt for the pride that is hiding safely inside your religious habits. He demands that you sweep out the hypocrisy that makes you look incredibly impressive on the outside while leaving you entirely hollow and starving on the inside. You have to be willing to eat the bread of affliction again. You have to be willing to sit at the table, strip away the addictive flavor of your own ego, and consume the flat, heavy, uninflated reality of your absolute dependence on the cross. It is not a comfortable meal to swallow, but it is the only food that actually sets you free. And when you finally sweep the house clean, when you finally take the feather and throw the old, sour dough into the fire, you make room for a completely different kind of expansion to begin. It is midnight in Goshen. The belts are fastened. The wooden staffs are gripped tight in calloused hands. The dough in the bowls is flat, heavy, and silent, waiting for a people who are finally walking out of the empire. A nation of slaves eats in the dark, and the bread of haste becomes the bread of freedom. A prophet stares across the Jordan River, and the flat loaf becomes a mirror for a wandering soul. Now, they are walking out in the dark. But leaving a geography is not the same thing as leaving a system. A rabbi warns his friends on a rocking boat, and the hypocrisy of the elite is exposed as a quiet contagion. A woman hides yeast in 3 measures of flour, and the subversive grace of God begins to consume the earth. A fractured church boasts in their rebellion, and an apostle commands them to sweep the ancient floor. A father hunts with a flickering candle, and the hidden pride of the human ego is dragged into the light. A savior is broken like uninflated bread, and the sour residue of the world is finally thrown into the fire. One contagion, one cure. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The bread of affliction. Lechem oni. We spend our entire lives trying to look bigger than we are. We curate our images. We inflate our accomplishments. And we desperately add the yeast of human approval to our daily flour, just so we don't look small. But the meal of deliverance is deliberately unimpressive. If you are in a season where your life feels flat, where your faith feels unglamorous, and where you are painfully aware of your absolute dependence on God, if they take a lump of Egyptian starter dough with them into the desert, they will be baking the memory of empire into their future. Do not rush back to Egypt just to find some flavor. Do not reach for the leaven of the culture just to puff yourself up. The uninflated life is not a punishment. It is a quarantine. It is the place where God breaks your reliance on your own ego, so you can actually survive the promised land. And may the God who sees exactly what is hiding in the dark, the corners of your house, give you the courage to sweep it clean and fill you with the solid, unbreakable weight of His own presence. They will be feeding their children the fermented residue of their own slavery. God is not just getting them out of Egypt. They are eating roasted meat in the middle of the night, chewing quickly as the smell of lamb's blood dries on the wooden doorposts outside. He is getting Egypt out of them. But the command to scrape the dough from the mixing bowls is only the beginning of the metaphor, to feel the real danger of what they are leaving behind. You have to look at what that microscopic fungus actually does when it hits the flour. The chemical process is violent, even if it happens in absolute silence. When wild yeast meets wet flour in a warm, dark bowl, it begins to consume the natural sugars. It ferments, producing alcohol and carbon dioxide gas, trapping invisible bubbles inside the dough and forcing it to swell against the sides of the clay pot. The dough sours. It literally decays in order to expand. In the ancient Near East, fermentation was often viewed through the lens of corruption. A piece of dough left out to rot became the catalyst for the next batch. The Hebrew word for the leavened bread they are forbidden to eat is chametz. But the word for the starter dough itself, the old lump they are commanded to throw out, is seor. The texts tell them to search their homes for seor and ensure no chametz is eaten. Both words are anchored in a biological reality that carries heavy linguistic baggage. The root verb behind chametz means to be sour, and they are eating flat, hard bread. There is no time to let it rise. There is no time for comfort, to be embittered, or to be cruel. When the psalmist describes a heart that is pierced and bitter, he uses the exact same root. When Isaiah speaks of the ruthless, violent oppressor walking through the streets, the word is right there. Chametz is not an ingredient. It is a contagion. It is the principle of puffing up. It takes a small, dense amount of substance and inflates it with empty air, making it appear larger, more impressive, and more dominant than it actually is. It is the perfect agricultural metaphor for arrogance. This was the exact summary of the empire they were fleeing. Pharaoh's Egypt was a culture built on chametz, an entire civilization inflating itself to divine proportions on the backs of forced Hebrew labor. A kingdom that looked monumental on the outside, massive limestone pyramids scraping the desert sky, golden chariots blinding the eye in the sun, but was fundamentally sour, bitter, and ruthless on the inside. God is forcing a physical reset by commanding the Israelites to sweep every crumb of Seor from their homes. He is demanding a hard break from the arrogance of Egypt. By refusing the Shemets, the slaves are stripping their diet down to bare, uninflated reality. Unleavened bread matzah is flat, dense, and heavy. Most people assume this detail, the unleavened bread of the Passover, is just a matter of ancient logistics. The standard reading is that God was moving too fast. It does not puff up. It cannot hide what it is. The unleavened bread is the food of people who know exactly how small they are. This act of sweeping the house clean became an annual rhythm, a yearly detox for the nation of Israel. Every spring, for thousands of years, they would sweep the corners of their stone floors, hunting for any hidden trace of the old sourdough. But God didn't just call it the bread of haste. When Moses speaks to the people, a generation later, staring across the Jordan River into the Promised Land, he gives this flat, heavy loaf a different name, and that new name reveals the painful reality of what it actually takes to stay free. Moses stands on the plains of Moab. The wind blows off the Jordan River, lifting the dust around the sandals of a generation that has never seen Egypt. They are staring across the water at a land they are about to conquer. They are preparing for the Passover, and Moses gives the flat bread a new name. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. The Hebrew phrase is lechemoni, bread of poverty, bread of misery, bread of lowliness. Wait, this is the meal of deliverance. The escape was too sudden, and the Israelite slaves simply did not have time to wait for their dough to ferment. And it does carry that historical memory. This is the ultimate celebration of national freedom. Why name the menu after the pain? Because real liberation is not glamorous. Because real freedom is flat, dense, and difficult to chew. Look at the wilderness they just survived. They complained about the food. They cried for the garlic, the onions, the sharp smell of the leeks, and the rich grease of the Egyptian meat pots. They begged to go back to the chains just to have a predictable meal. Slavery offered them flavor. Freedom offered them truth. A cloud moves. They pack the tents. A fire stops. They drop their bags. A rock splits. Water pools in the dust. Manna falls. The sun melts it. A golden calf burns. A plague spreads. A generation dies in the sand. For 40 years, they learned exactly who they were. They learned how quickly they rebelled when they were thirsty. They learned how easily they corrupted when they were bored. If they were allowed to eat the puffed up, fermented bread of the empire, they might cross the Jordan River thinking they were strong. They might conquer Jericho and think they did it by their own brilliance. They might forget that they are completely dependent on the sky for tomorrow's breakfast. The bread of affliction is not a memorial to Pharaoh's whip. It is a mirror for Israel's soul. It forces them to sit down once a year. It is the bread of haste. But if you look closer at the biological reality of how bread was made in the ancient world and eat the food of dependence, it forces them to swallow the reality that they are poor in spirit, fragile in flesh, and entirely upheld by grace. You eat lechem oni so you do not become a pharaoh in the land you are about to inherit. That rhythm of sweeping the house and eating the flat bread held the nation together for 15 centuries. Every spring, the crumbs were swept out. Every spring, the bread was broken. But then, a rabbi gets into a wooden boat on the Sea of Galilee, and he warns his friends about a completely different kind of yeast. It happens on a wooden boat, with the sound of water slapping against the hull. Matthew chapter 16. The disciples are checking their pockets, searching through their bags, realizing they forgot to buy food for the crossing. They are worried about their empty stomachs. But Jesus looks at them and delivers a warning that has absolutely nothing to do with their lunch. Watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. The word the English translators render as leaven is the Greek word zume. It appears exactly 11 times in the New Testament. To understand what Jesus is actually warning them about, you have to look at where this word comes from. The noun zume is derived from the Greek root verb zo. Zeo means to boil, to bubble up, or to be hot, at the specific Hebrew command given in the dark. And at the startling warning a rabbi gives to his disciples thousands of years later on a Galilean hillside, it paints a visceral picture of a substance that is violently agitated, swelling from the inside out until it completely overtakes its container. In Luke's parallel account of this exact moment, Jesus gives them the direct translation of the metaphor: beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is not just a theatrical mask. It is a biological contagion. If seeing these ancient texts connect across thousands of years is making the Bible feel alive to you for the first time, you're exactly who this channel is for. Leave a comment below with your thoughts and hit subscribe, because every week we dig into the layers you were never taught in Sunday school. So the disciples stare at him, completely missing the point. They start arguing among themselves about who forgot to pack the bread. They think he is giving them a grocery lecture, but Jesus is diagnosing a spiritual infection. The teaching of the religious elite was Zume. They had taken a tiny starter dough of human tradition, extra rules, public displays of fasting, the demand for absolute status, and kneaded it into the flour of the Torah. And just like chametz in Egypt, that bitter addition was boiling up, fermenting the culture, and inflating their egos. You start to see something the logistical reading completely misses. The unleavened bread is not a recipe for travel. It is a quarantine protocol, while leaving their actual souls starved of the bread of heaven. A little bit of self-righteousness, dropped into a religious community, will eventually infect the whole batch. Jesus is telling them to sweep the boat clean. He is commanding them to leave the Zume on the shore, because the kingdom he is building cannot be puffed up by human pride. It has to be flat. It has to be honest. But just when you think you understand exactly how the New Testament uses this metaphor, just when you assume yeast is always a symbol for sin and hypocrisy, Jesus flips the entire biological process upside down. A woman stands in a stone kitchen. The air is thick with the smell of crushed grain. Her arms are coated in white dust. She plunges her hands into a massive wooden trough, kneading 3 measures of flour, roughly 60 pounds of ground wheat, enough to feed a village. And she takes a lump of yeast, passand, a piece of zume, and pushes it deep into the dark center of the dough. The parable is exactly 1 sentence long. Matthew chapter 13, verse 33. But to a first-century Jewish crowd, trained from childhood to view yeast as the ultimate symbol of corruption and pride, this single sentence is a shock to the system. To understand the weight of this night, you have to step into the kitchen of the ancient Near East. In the days of Moses, imagine the theological whiplash. They have spent their entire lives scrubbing their baseboards every spring to remove this exact substance. To compare the holy reign of God to yeast is like comparing divine grace to a virus. It is unsettling. It is dangerous, but it is perfectly accurate. Jesus takes the contagion of Egypt, he takes the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, and he completely reclaims the biological mechanism. The kingdom of God is not a military invasion. It is a biological takeover. It does not arrive with the blast of trumpets. It arrives in the dark. It does not march with Roman swords. It kneads into the flour. It is hidden in the dirt of a Bethlehem stable. It is buried in the ordinary routines of tax collectors and fishermen. It is plunged deep into the heavy, lifeless mass of a broken world, and it begins to work from the inside out. You cannot see the kingdom working, just as you cannot see the microscopic spores feeding on the sugar in the bowl, but you cannot stop the expansion. Once the kingdom touches the heavy dough of humanity, it bubbles, it multiplies. It alters the structure of grief. It ferments the dead places of the human heart. It bubbles up in the silence of a borrowed tomb until a massive stone has to roll away. The woman does not just bake a loaf, she leavens a feast.